physicians are about to become the rock stars of ancient medicine. Herophilus and Erasistratus didn't discover penicillin or pioneer surgery. They did something far more visceral. They cut living people open and invited an audience. Picture it, a public demonstration space in the jewel of the ancient world. Educated citizens gathering like it's a TED Talk, notebooks ready. The Ptolemaic rulers, flush with power and morbid curiosity, supply the raw materials. Criminals, mostly. People society decided didn't count anymore. Then the cutting starts. No anesthesia, no mercy. Just screaming and the scratch of styluses recording observations. Herophilus mapped the nervous system while his subjects convulsed on the table. Traced neural pathways through living tissue because dead nerves don't conduct signals. Erasistratus unraveled the mysteries of digestion, watching organs function in real time as his victims experienced a uniquely educational death. The crowds took notes. The knowledge proved invaluable. Our understanding of human physiology owes a debt to men who died begging for it to stop. Here's the first pattern that repeats throughout history. Progress demands payment. Sometimes that bill comes due in blood and terror. The nervous system diagram in your textbook? Built on screams. Your knowledge of how food moves through intestines? Purchased with agony. These weren't sadists, necessarily. They were scientists facing an impossible problem. You can't understand how a living system works by studying a corpse. Function requires operation. They chose knowledge over ethics and called it justified. The Ptolemaic kings didn't lose sleep. Cruel and unusual wasn't a legal concept yet. Human rights weren't even a philosophical discussion. You were either citizen or subject or criminal or slave, and only one of those categories got to complain. What's haunting isn't that ancient Alexandria turned medicine to theater. It's what comes next. Because here's the thing we tell ourselves. That was barbarism. We're civilized now. We have ethics boards and international conventions and laws. Civilization didn't make us more humane. It just taught us to hide the bodies better. The Tuskegee betrayal. Free healthcare. No cost. Just sign here. In 1932, the United States Public Health Service rolled into Macon County, Alabama with a promise. 600 black men, sharecroppers mostly, poor and desperate, heard about treatment for bad blood. A vague term that covered everything from anemia to fatigue to syphilis. 399 of them had that last one, late-stage syphilis, eating them alive from the inside. Here's the twist that turns your stomach. The doctors never intended to help. The Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male. They put untreated right in the title. No ambiguity, no confusion. This was observation, not intervention. Science, not medicine. Researchers took meticulous notes as symptoms progressed, documented the timeline like botanists tracking plant decay. Blindness at year 7, neurological damage by year 10, dementia, paralysis, organ failure, all carefully recorded. The men thought they were getting treatment. Spinal taps sold as special free treatment. The doctors called them test subjects in private and smiled to their faces in public. Then 1947 arrived with penicillin, a miracle cure. Simple, effective, readily available. Syphilis became one shot away from manageable. The study continued for 25 more years. 25 years of watching men deteriorate when healing sat in a medicine cabinet. The researchers didn't withhold a theoretical treatment. They denied access to the standard cure while pretending to provide care. Men went blind, lost their minds, died screaming from pain their doctors could have stopped with one injection. Wives contracted the disease, children born with congenital syphilis, the infection spreading through families while men in white coats took notes and nodded sympathetically. Clinical detachment as moral anesthesia. Distance yourself enough and suffering becomes data. The study only stopped in 1972 when Peter Buxton, a public health service investigator, leaked the truth to the press. 40 years of deliberate harm ended because one person couldn't stomach the lie anymore. Final tally? 28 men dead directly from syphilis, 100 more from related complications, 40 wives infected, 19 children born with the disease. Generations of trauma baked into one community's relationship with medical authority. The lesson? Read the fine print on free healthcare, especially when someone's decided you're worth less than others. America congratulated itself on being civilized. Meanwhile, across the ocean, other nations were conducting their own experiments in how much horror humans could justify. Unit 731. If you thought Tuskegee was bad, strap in. We're heading to Manchuria, where Japan decided to industrialize human suffering. Unit 731 wasn't a rogue operation. It was government-funded, military-backed, and staffed with some of Japan's brightest medical minds. Shiro Ishii, the commander, built a facility that looked like a research campus from the outside. Inside, a slaughterhouse with lab coats. The scale makes your brain refuse it. Thousands of victims, systematic torture disguised as science, an assembly line of agony running 24 hours a day for 8 years. They infected prisoners with plague, with anthrax, with cholera, then documented the progression. How long until fever? When do the organs fail? At what point does a human being lose the will to survive? They took notes while people rotted from the inside. Vivisection became routine, cutting open living subjects without anesthesia because, according to the researchers, pain medication altered the results. They needed pure data, so they strapped people down and dissected them while conscious, watched them scream, measured how long the screaming lasted. Frostbite studies in winter. They'd expose limbs to sub-zero temperatures until tissue froze solid, then beat the frozen arms and legs with sticks to test durability. Dunk them in water at various temperatures to find optimal thawing methods. Imperial Japanese Army needed to know how to treat their soldiers' frostbite, so Chinese prisoners lost their limbs in the most agonizing way possible. The victims weren't called victims. They were logs, maruta in Japanese, raw lumber for the mill. Strip away the humanity, and suddenly it's just resource management, bureaucratic, efficient. Easier to sleep at night when you're processing logs instead of murdering human beings. Scientists treated people as raw materials because the paperwork said so. Language as moral anesthesia. Call them something else and you can do anything. Thousands died, most in indescribable agony. The facility covered 6 square kilometers, multiple buildings dedicated to different types of suffering. It was organized, professional, the banality of evil with a medical degree. Then 1945 arrived. Japan surrendered. War crime tribunals loomed. Unit 731's researchers faced execution for what they'd done. Here's the kicker. The United States granted them immunity, full pardons in exchange for the research data. American occupation forces looked at 8 years of documented torture and thought, we could use this. The information proved too valuable to bury with the perpetrators. Justice served? Absolute zero. Shiro Ishii died in 1959, free, wealthy, never spent a day in prison. His colleagues resumed medical careers. Some became professors. Others joined pharmaceutical companies. The pattern deepens. Governments trade morality for information. Ethics become negotiable when the data looks useful enough. America condemned Nazi atrocities at Nuremberg while quietly filing Unit 731's torture research in classified archives. Speaking of Nazis, they were running their own experiments. Different methods, same contempt for human life. Frozen in hell. Dachau concentration camp, 1942. Doctors in white coats prepare for another day of research. Their justification sounds almost reasonable. Luftwaffe pilots kept crashing into the North Sea. How long could a human survive in freezing water? What's the best way to revive someone near death from cold? Valid questions. Monstrous methodology. Siegmund Rascher ran the operation with clinical precision. He submerged prisoners in tanks of ice water, 28 degrees Fahrenheit, just above freezing. Most victims went in naked because clothing complicated the data. Electrodes monitored vitals while men shivered themselves into unconsciousness. The sessions lasted hours, 3 hours average, sometimes longer if the subject proved resilient. Rascher took meticulous notes: heart rate, body temperature, time until loss of consciousness, time until death. Every data point purchased with agony. Men begged, screamed, eventually stopped doing either. Hypothermia shuts down the brain in stages. First you're cold, then you're confused, then you hallucinate warmth and start stripping off clothes that aren't there. Finally, mercifully, you slip away. But Rascher didn't always let them slip away. Sometimes he pulled them out right before death to test rewarming methods. Hot baths mostly. The shock often killed them anyway, but at least he got numbers. Then he tried something crueler. Forced body heat rewarming. He'd pull naked women from the women's camp and make them warm the frozen men with their own bodies, skin to skin. The absurd cruelty of it, turning human warmth into torture instrument while calling it medicine. Approximately 90 people died in these tanks, 90 documented deaths. The real number probably higher because record-keeping got sloppy near the war's end. The data survived intact, detailed, organized, impossible to ignore. After liberation, Allied forces found folders full of graphs, charts, survival curves. Rascher faced trial at Nuremberg, found guilty, executed. But those folders haunted medical ethics for decades. Here's the poison pill. The research answered real questions. Hypothermia treatment today partly builds on knowledge gained from torture. Do you use data extracted through evil if it might save lives? Do you bury invaluable information because of how it was obtained? No consensus exists, just an uncomfortable truth about progress and its price. What's most disturbing isn't that monsters did this, it's that the monsters were doctors, educated men who believed they were advancing science. Rascher genuinely thought his work mattered, saw himself as a researcher, not a murderer. The banality of evil wearing a lab coat and carrying a clipboard. The Nazis weren't alone in this self-deception. Back in America, doctors were running their own experiments, different uniforms, same moral vacancy. The Monster Study. Wendell Johnson had a theory about stuttering. He believed it was learned behavior, created by negative feedback and criticism. Prove that, and you'd revolutionize speech therapy. So he decided to create stutterers from scratch. The University of Iowa backed him. They found him the perfect test subjects. 22 orphans from the Soldiers and Sailors Orphans Home. No parents to ask questions, no one checking the consent forms too carefully. Johnson split the children into groups. Half received positive speech therapy, encouragement, patience, praise. The other half got negative therapy. That's the clinical term for deliberate psychological torture. Researchers berated children for normal speech patterns, called them stutterers when they weren't, mocked every slight hesitation, turned speech, something kids do unconsciously, into a minefield of anxiety. Every word became a potential failure. The children who already stuttered got worse, no surprise there. But here's the gut punch. Kids with normal speech developed lifelong problems. They internalized the criticism, started second-guessing every syllable. Their brains rewired around fear. Johnson had set out to prove stuttering was learned. Instead, he proved you could torture children into speech disorders and call it science. The hypothesis wasn't even validated. His theory remained unproven. He'd destroyed young lives for inconclusive data. Then he buried it. The study disappeared into filing cabinets for decades. Colleagues who knew about it called it the monster study behind Johnson's back, not because the results were monstrous, though they were, because Johnson himself had become the monster in his own experiment. He never apologized, never followed up with his victims, never tried to undo the damage. He died in 1965, his reputation intact, while children he'd broken carried their speech impediments into adulthood. Some of those orphans are still alive. They still stutter, still carry anxiety around simple conversation. Johnson gave them that gift in exchange for data he couldn't even use. Notice the pattern yet? Researchers love vulnerable populations, orphans, prisoners, people with no advocates and no recourse. The powerless make convenient test subjects because they can't fight back. And when you can't fight back, someone will eventually decide you're worth less than the knowledge they might gain. Johnson worked in plain sight at a respected university. Imagine what happened when governments decided to get involved, when national security became the justification and secrecy the standard operating procedure. Mind control wasn't science fiction. It was just another project. MK Ultra. The CIA believed mind control was possible. Not movie villain hypnosis, actual chemical reprogramming of human consciousness. LSD looked like the magic bullet. Project MK Ultra became the delivery system. 20 years. Thousands of unwitting subjects, your government dosing citizens with hallucinogens to see what would break first, their minds or their loyalty. The victims came from convenient pools. Soldiers, prisoners, psychiatric patients already locked up and medicated, people who couldn't say no or wouldn't be believed if they tried. The CIA even dosed its own agents without warning. No consent forms, no debriefing, just surprise acid trips and careful observation of the fallout. Frank Olson found out the hard way. Scientist, biological warfare expert, attending a work retreat in 1953 when someone spiked his Cointreau with LSD. Olson didn't know, spent 9 days spiraling into paranoia and confusion. Then he went through a hotel window, 13th floor, dead on impact. The CIA called it suicide. The family called it murder. The truth got buried in classified files and conflicting testimonies. Olson's son spent decades trying to prove his father was thrown, not jumped. Never got definitive answers, just suspicious circumstances and a government that wouldn't talk. MK Ultra went far beyond acid. Sensory deprivation tanks, electric shock, sexual humiliation, verbal abuse calibrated to shatter identity. They wanted to break people completely, then rebuild them as something controllable. The human mind as wet clay for government sculptors. Techniques refined at universities and hospitals. Doctors administered the torture. Professors wrote the protocols. Academic institutions took CIA money and asked 0 questions about ethics. McGill University in Montreal ran some of the worst programs. Patients seeking help for anxiety left as vegetables. The goal was simple. Find a way to make someone do anything. Confess, betray, kill on command. The CIA genuinely believed they could crack the code of human will. They failed, spectacularly. Destroyed lives, learned nothing useful, and created trauma that echoes through families decades later. Congress investigated in 1975 after a New York Times exposé. CIA Director Richard Helms had already destroyed most records in 1973, ordered the files burned before anyone could ask uncomfortable questions. What survived came from misfiled paperwork and administrative accidents. No one went to prison. A few officials testified, offered vague apologies about different times and national security. Victims got financial settlements with gag orders attached. Justice served. A polite fiction. Your tax dollars well spent. The government drugged its own citizens, destroyed mines in the name of Cold War paranoia, then shredded the evidence and called it classified. MKUltra proved governments don't need concentration camps to commit atrocities, just secrecy, funding, and the conviction that national security justifies anything. The CIA wasn't alone in using unwitting subjects for dangerous research. Other agencies had their own projects, different methods, same disregard for consent. Sometimes they didn't even bother with chemicals. Sometimes they just used disease. We like to believe these experiments belong to the past, that we've learned, that we're better now. But history only stays buried when people stop paying attention. If this story unsettled you, good. That discomfort is the point. Subscribe and keep watching, because the moment we stop remembering what humans are capable of is the moment we risk repeating it.